Have you ever seen a person's spirit treated like a napkin? Something to be used, soiled, and then casually discarded without a second thought? A moment of such careless, breathtaking cruelty that it freezes the air around it. A monument to the chasm between the haves and the have-nots. In the heart of Chicago, inside a restaurant named Aurelia, where the chandeliers dripped light like frozen diamonds, a young waitress named Clara Mayhew was about to be ground under the heel of a woman who believed the world was her personal property. That woman was Serafina Belmont, the impeccably polished fiancée of real estate titan Alistair Finch. In front of a table of powerful Japanese investors, Serafina was about to unleash a torrent of casual disdain so profound it would silence the entire dining room. But what Serafina, in her bubble of inherited wealth and unearned confidence, could never have known was that the quiet girl she was attempting to erase was not just a waitress. She was a ghost from a past Alistair's family had buried long ago, and she was about to inherit the one thing that could bring their entire empire to its knees. Because in the grand ledger of life, fortunes are not settled by the price of a dress, but by debts of integrity that always, eventually come due. Aurelia was less a restaurant and more a declaration of victory. Perched on the 95th floor of the Finch Tower, its windows offered a god's-eye view of Chicago, a sprawling kingdom of light and shadow under a blanket of stars. The air inside was a carefully calibrated mixture of seared scallops, vintage burgundy, and the low, self-assured murmur of generational wealth. Every transaction, from the ordering of a $400 appetizer to a whispered business deal, was conducted with the frictionless ease of people who had never been told no. In this gilded theater, Clara Mayhew, at 24, was an essential but invisible part of the machinery. She possessed a kind of focused stillness, a quality honed by years of balancing others' needs against her own exhaustion. Her uniform, a tailored black dress, simple but elegant, and a short starched white apron, was a costume of professional deference. She navigated the crowded floor with a dancer's grace, her mind a dizzying database of allergies, wine vintages, and the subtle tells of a diner's impatience. She wasn't just carrying plates, she was managing the fragile egos of the city's most powerful people. Tonight, the pressure was immense. The corner table, a semi-private alcove known as the Perch, for its unparalleled view of the lakefront, was occupied by Alistair Finch himself. In the rarefied world of Chicago real estate, the Finch name was scripture. Alistair, the third-generation scion, was trying to carve his own legacy, one distinct from that of his famously ruthless grandfather, Augustus Finch. His current obsession was the Zenith, a proposed skyscraper that would be the tallest in the Western Hemisphere, a needle of glass and steel meant to pierce the heavens and solidify his place in history. Tonight's dinner was the final hurdle. He was hosting executives from the Morita Corporation of Tokyo, the primary investors who would make or break the Zenith. The restaurant manager, a perpetually anxious man named Gerard, had briefed the staff 4 separate times. Mr. Finch cannot be distracted. His fiancée, Ms. Belmont, expects perfection, he had stressed, his eyes wide. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can go wrong. Clara knew of Serafina Belmont. Everyone did. Her life was a meticulously curated narrative of polo matches, charity galas, and trips to St. Bart's, all chronicled for her hundreds of thousands of social media followers. She was the product of new money trying desperately to look like old money, and her engagement to Alistair Finch was seen as the ultimate merger of a rising dynasty with an established one. Their arrival caused a subtle shift in the restaurant's gravitational pull. Alistair Finch was handsome in a severe patrician way, with intense gray eyes and a suit that cost more than Clara's car. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. Serafina, in contrast, was a spectacle. She wore a dress of white silk that seemed to be held together by sheer willpower and a string of South Sea pearls. Her smile was a brilliant, practiced thing that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. Her gaze swept the room not with appreciation, but with assessment, cataloging the other diners' jewelry and attire with the dispassionate air of an appraiser. Clara was assigned to their table. "Good evening, Mr. Finch, Miss Belmont," she said, her voice a model of calm professionalism. "May I offer you some water to begin?" We have still, sparkling, or a mineral water from the Italian Alps. Alistair gave a distracted nod, his focus already on his guess. Sparkling for everyone, please. Serafina, however, didn't deign to look at Clara. She was fussing with her clutch, her crimson-nailed fingers clicking against the gold clasp. And bring a bottle of the 1990 Romanée Conti, she commanded, her voice thin and sharp. And be sure the sommelier presents it. I won't have it manhandled. Clara kept her expression placid. Of course, madam. An exceptional choice. The wine was listed at $25,000 a bottle. It was a sum so abstract it might as well have been monopoly money. It was more than she had managed to save in 3 years of working double shifts to pay for her grandmother's mounting medical bills. The dinner service began, a tense ballet of precision and diplomacy. Clara was a phantom, refreshing water glasses, clearing plates, ensuring every need was met before it was voiced. The Japanese investors were impeccably polite, their conversation with Alistair a quiet, nuanced dance of finance and engineering. He was in his element, articulate, visionary, and persuasive. The only jarring element was Serafina. She was visibly bored by the technical talk of load-bearing walls and zoning variances. She'd interrupt to complain that her water glass had a smudge only she could see, or to ask Alistair a question about an upcoming auction in a voice loud enough to derail the conversation. She treated Clara like an automaton, a disembodied pair of hands. A flick of her wrist meant, "Clear this." A sharp, impatient glance meant, "More bread." Clara absorbed it all, the minor indignities piling up like grains of sand, each one insignificant on its own, but collectively forming a heavy, irritating weight. It was the price of admission for a job that paid the bills. But Serafina seemed to have a quota of cruelty to fill for the evening, and she was not yet satisfied. As Clara was presenting the main courses, a delicate operation requiring perfect timing and a steady hand, Serafina chose her moment. "Alistair, darling," she said, her voice cutting through a complex discussion about Japanese steel tariffs. "I was just thinking, isn't it a shame what's become of service? It feels so temporary, as if it's just a way station for people with failed dreams." Mr. Morita, the lead investor, paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, a flicker of profound discomfort in his eyes. Alistair shot Serafina a look, a micro-expression of pure annoyance that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The deal was everything. He could manage Serafina later. Clara said nothing, her focus absolute as she placed a plate of seared A5 Wagyu in front of him. She had learned long ago that reacting was a form of surrender, but her silence seemed to provoke Serafina further. "I mean, just look," Serafina continued, gesturing vaguely in Clara's direction, though she still refused to make eye contact. "What's your name, dear?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Clara, madam," she replied, her voice perfectly even. "Clara," Serafina repeated, tasting the name as if it were a cheap wine. "Tell us, Clara, what are you really? A struggling artist? A dancer with 2 left feet? What grand ambition died to bring you here, serving us our dinner?" The air at the table turned to ice. One of the younger Japanese executives looked down at his lap, his embarrassment palpable. Alistair's jaw was a granite ridge. This was not just rude. It was a catastrophic miscalculation, a display of instability in front of men who valued discipline and control above all else. Clara carefully placed the final plate, then straightened up. For the first time, she allowed herself to meet Serafina's mocking gaze. She gave a small, impeccably professional smile. "My only ambition this evening, madam, is to ensure you and your guests have a memorable dining experience," she said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I will fetch the wine." Her composure, her refusal to be drawn into the mud, seemed to enrage Serafina. It was a denial of her power to inflict pain. For Serafina Belmont, being denied was a foreign and infuriating concept. As Clara turned to step away from the table, Serafina's stilettoed foot darted out. It was a small, petty, almost childish movement, but it was executed with a viper's speed. The world went into slow motion. Clara's ankle caught the leg of Serafina's chair. For a sickening, eternal second, she fought for her balance, her arms flailing. But the laws of momentum are utterly indifferent to 9-figure real estate deals. The decanter of 1990 Romanée Conti, which she held with the care of a museum curator handling a Fabergé egg, tipped. A river of deep, fragrant crimson cascaded downwards. It wasn't a splash, it was a flood. It sheeted across the corner of the pristine tablecloth, but its true destination was the lap of Serafina Belmont's immaculate white silk dress. A collective gasp swept through Aurelia. The murmur of conversation died instantly. Every single eye in the restaurant was now fixed on their table. The wine, dark as a bruise, saturated the expensive fabric, a grotesque, spreading stain on the canvas of her manufactured purity. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of $25,000 wine onto the Italian marble floor. Serafina looked down, her face a carefully constructed mask of beauty, twisted. Shock gave way to disbelief and then to a tidal wave of incandescent rage. Her shriek was a physical thing, a sound so raw and ugly it seemed to shatter the crystal glasses on the table. "You clumsy, worthless little bitch!" she screamed, leaping to her feet so violently that her chair clattered backwards. "Look what you did! This is custom-made Valentino. It's worth more than your entire miserable existence." Clara stood frozen, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. I'm so sorry, Miss Belmont. I must have tripped. I'm terribly, terribly sorry." "Sorry?" Serafina's laugh was like breaking glass. "Sorry doesn't fix a $30,000 dress. You did this on purpose. I saw it in your eyes. You were jealous." The accusation was so wildly unhinged, it rendered Clara speechless. Alistair was on his feet now, his face a thundercloud. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at the horrified faces of his investors, at the ruins of his meticulously planned evening. His legacy, the zenith, was sinking in a puddle of spilled wine. "Serafina, that's enough. Sit down," he commanded through gritted teeth. "Enough?" she shrieked, turning on him. "She assaults me, humiliates me in front of your clients, and you tell me to sit down? Whose side are you on? Hers?" She jabbed a finger, tipped with a blood-red nail, at Clara. "This nobody?" Gerard, the manager, scurried over, his face the color of ash. "Ms. Belmont, please. We will handle everything. The cleaning, of course, is on the house." "The house?" Serafina scoffed. "This imbecile is going to pay for it. I want her fired. Now. And I want her wages garnished until she's paid for every last cent of this dress." Clara felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, judging, pitying, scornful. The professional wall she had built brick by brick over the years was crumbling. She could feel the burn of tears behind her eyes, but she would not let them fall. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. "It was an accident," Clara managed, her voice trembling but firm. "An accident you'll be paying for until you're old and gray," Serafina sneered. Alistair finally intervened, grabbing Serafina's arm. His voice was dangerously low. "You are causing a scene." "I'm causing a scene?" she cried, her voice escalating. "She attacked me." Mr. Morita and his associates were now standing, their faces stoic masks that barely concealed their deep displeasure. Mr. Morita gave a short, formal bow to Alistair. "Finch-san," he said, his English precise and cold, "perhaps this is not an ideal evening for our discussion. We will be in touch." With that, they turned and walked away, a silent procession of disapproval. The deal was not just on ice, it was dead. The blood drained from Alistair's face. Months of work, of travel, of painstaking negotiation, incinerated in a fit of pique over a dress. He turned his glacial gray eyes on Clara. He no longer saw a person. He saw the catalyst for his colossal failure. "Get her out of here," he seethed to Gerard. "She's fired, and yes," he added, his voice like chipping ice, "she will pay for the dress. My legal team will be in contact." He didn't even look at Clara as he pronounced the sentence, dismissing her as if she were a piece of shattered glass to be swept away. Gerard nodded subserviently, refusing to meet Clara's eyes. He gestured for her to follow him. As Clara walked the long, silent path of shame toward the staff exit, she could hear Serafina's voice, triumphant and venomous, carrying across the restaurant. "Let that be a lesson to you, sweetie," Serafina called out, her voice dripping with poison. Some people are born to wear Valentino, and some are born to spill wine on it. Don't you ever forget your place again." A hot, nauseating wave of humiliation washed over Clara. She held her head high, her back straight, as she pushed through the kitchen doors, but inside she was in fragments. In the glittering arena of Chicago's elite, her place had been made brutally clear. None of them could possibly have known that her real place was one they had stolen, and she was about to take it back. The train ride home to her small apartment in Logan Square was a blur of screeching wheels and flickering lights. The cacophony of the city was a whisper compared to the raging storm in Clara's mind. Fired, sued for $30,000, humiliated. Each word was a fresh wound. She lived in a third-floor walk-up, a cozy but cramped space filled with books on art history and architectural theory, a world away from the opulent splendor of Aurelia. The rent was a constant worry, and her grandmother's nursing home bills were a relentless tide she was barely holding back. The prospect of a $30,000 debt was not just a setback, it was a drowning. She unlocked the 3 deadbolts on her door and stepped inside. The apartment, her sanctuary, felt cold and hostile. Sinking onto her worn velvet armchair, a cherished flea market find, the composure she had clung to so desperately finally shattered. The tears came, hot and silent, carving paths down her cheeks. They were tears of fury as much as despair. Fury at Serafina's venom, at Alistair's cold, calculated cruelty, and at a system that allowed the wealthy to treat other human beings as disposable. She had been working 60-hour weeks, the restaurant by night and a library archive by day, to keep her head above water. Her dream of finishing her master's degree in architectural preservation seemed to recede further with every passing day. All her hopes were pinned on the one thing she couldn't control, the settlement of her grandfather's estate. Her grandfather, Thomas Mayhew, had died 3 months ago. A quiet, gentle man she had adored. He had been a recluse in his later years, haunted by what her grandmother called the Great Betrayal. He had been an architect, brilliant but obscure. When he passed, Clara was stunned to learn he had left his entire estate to her. His lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Davies, had been frustratingly vague. "Your grandfather's affairs are complex, my dear," he had said. "There are old documents that need to be authenticated. It will take time." Clara had assumed it was a small house, perhaps a modest savings account, enough to ease the burden of her grandmother's care, but nothing more. Now, even that small inheritance would be devoured by Alistair Finch's lawyers. The next morning after a sleepless night, her phone rang. It was Mr. Davies' office. "Ms. Mayhew, Mr. Davies would like to see you this morning at 10. He says it is a matter of the utmost urgency regarding the final disposition of your grandfather's estate." With a sense of dread, Clara agreed. She might as well face all the firing squads at once. The offices of Davies, Cohen, and Strathmore were in the Rookery Building, a historic landmark that Clara had studied and loved. Its light-filled court was a masterpiece of ironwork and design, a stark contrast to the soulless glass box of the Finch Tower. Dressed in her only presentable blazer, Clara felt like a ghost haunting a place she didn't belong. Mr. Davies greeted her with a warm but grave expression. He was in his 70s, with kind eyes that had seen a great deal of human folly. "Clara, thank you for coming in," he said, leading her into a wood-paneled office that smelled of old books and lemon polish. "Of course, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice small. She decided to be direct. "Before we begin, I need to tell you something. I lost my job last night, and there's a complication. A man, Alistair Finch, is threatening to sue me." Mr. Davies stopped, his hand resting on a thick, leather-bound portfolio on his desk. He looked at her over the rim of his spectacles. "Alistair Finch, you say? Augustus Finch's grandson?" A strange, unreadable expression crossed his face. "Clara, I am sorry to hear of your troubles. However, I have a feeling that by the time we are finished here, a $30,000 lawsuit will be the least of Alistair Finch's concerns, and the very least of yours." He gestured for her to sit. "Your grandfather," he began, his voice taking on a formal, solemn tone, "was a very private man. The great tragedy of his life made him so. He made me promise not to reveal the full nature of his assets until every last document was legally certified and unassailable. As of 9 a.m. this morning, that process is complete. He pushed the heavy portfolio across the desk. Clara, what do you know about the founding of Finch Enterprises? Only what everyone knows, she said, confused. Augustus Finch built it from the ground up after the war. A classic American success story. Mr. Davies smiled a sad, thin smile. That is the story Augustus Finch paid a great deal of money to create. It is, however, a fiction. In 1948, two young men, both brilliant and ambitious, founded a company together. One was Augustus Finch, a ruthless dealmaker with a gift for acquiring land and capital. The other was Thomas Mayhew, your grandfather, an architectural visionary, the artist who gave the company its soul. Clara stared at him, her heart beginning to pound. Her grandmother had only ever alluded to it in whispers, calling Augustus Finch the devil who stole your grandfather's life. They were partners, Mr. Davies continued, his voice resonating with old injustice. Finch and Mayhew. Your grandfather was the lead architect on their first 10 projects, including the iconic Marquette Building, the very foundation of the Finch empire. But Augustus was greedy. He saw that the name on the buildings was worth more than the money in the bank. He engineered a hostile buyout, using underhanded legal tactics to dilute your grandfather's stake. He threatened to ruin Thomas professionally, to blacklist him with every supplier in the city. Your grandfather, a gentle soul with a new baby, your mother, was broken. He took a pittance of a settlement and signed a non-disclosure agreement, vanishing from the history he helped create. Mr. Davies tapped the portfolio. But Augustus made one mistake. In his haste, he overlooked one clause in the original, ironclad partnership deed your grandfather had insisted upon. The clause states that the intellectual property rights for those first 10 foundational buildings, the master blueprints, the design philosophies, the very architectural DNA of the company, would forever remain with the Mayhew estate. More importantly, it stipulated that no foundational property could be significantly altered or demolished without the express written consent of Thomas Mayhew or his designated heir. At the time, Augustus considered it a meaningless concession to a defeated man. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. Clara, your grandfather didn't just leave you a house. He left you the key to the entire Finch legacy. You are the sole heir to the Mayhew Partnership estate. You hold veto power over the fate of the 10 most valuable properties in the Finch Enterprises portfolio. The room seemed to tilt. The sounds of the city below faded to a dull hum. Veto power. Finch Enterprises. Alistair Finch. But there's more, Mr. Davies said, his expression grim. The reason for my urgency. My sources tell me that Alistair Finch is days away from getting final approval from the city's Landmark Commission. He plans to demolish the Argosy Theater on Dearborn Street. He wants to build his new tower, the Zenith, on that site. The Argosy Theater. Clara felt a jolt, as if from a live wire. It was one of her grandfather's first and most beloved designs, a jewel box of a building she had written papers about. The Argosy is a foundational property, she whispered, already knowing the answer. Yes, Mr. Davies confirmed. It is building number 7 on the original deed. Alistair Finch, in his rush to make his mark, is about to commit an act of architectural patricide. And without your consent, it is an act that is legally, contractually, and financially impossible. He just doesn't know it yet. The final vote of the board to release the funds for demolition is tomorrow morning. Clara looked from the lawyer's earnest face to the portfolio that contained her grandfather's stolen legacy. Last night, she had been a waitress, fired and threatened by Alistair Finch. This morning, she held a century-old legal document that could shatter his grandest ambition. Mr. Davies gave her a steady look. Your grandfather never had the heart for a fight, my dear. He left you not just his legacy, but his armor. The question is, are you prepared to wear it? The next 24 hours were an exercise in compressed transformation. Clara felt as if she had been plunged into the deep end of a world she had only ever studied from the outside. The portfolio of her grandfather's documents sat on her small kitchen table, a tangible link to a past she was only just beginning to understand. It contained not only the partnership deed, but also dozens of his original sketches, notes, and journals filled with his elegant, spidery handwriting. Reading them, she felt a profound connection to the man she had lost. A man who believed buildings should have character, that they were living things meant to inspire, not just to occupy space. Panic was a constant, buzzing companion. The easiest path was to approach Finch Enterprises, reveal her leverage, and demand a quiet, multi-million-dollar settlement. She could pay for her grandmother's care for the rest of her life, finish her degree, and vanish. No one would blame her. But then she pictured the Argosy Theater, its beautiful, lyric facade being smashed to rubble, and she heard Serafina's sneering voice echo in her mind. "Don't you ever forget your place again." A cold, clear resolve began to crystallize within her, displacing the fear. Her place was not serving them. Her place was defending her grandfather's work. They had dismissed her as insignificant, a nobody. They were about to learn that history has a very long memory. She called Mr. Davies. "I'm not settling," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to that board meeting, but I need to be prepared. I need to understand everything." A smile was evident in the old lawyer's voice. "I was hoping you'd say that, Clara. Your grandfather's legacy deserves a champion. I've already taken the liberty of making some calls. A car will be at your door in an hour." The car, a discreet black Lincoln, took her to a suite at the Union League Club, a bastion of old Chicago. Waiting for her were Mr. Davies and two other people. He introduced them as Eleanor Vance, a formidable woman in her 60s who was the city's most respected architectural historian and preservationist, and Marcus Thorne, a sharp, fast-talking corporate strategist who specialized in shareholder activism. For the next 18 hours, the suite became a command center. Eleanor spread out high-resolution copies of Thomas Mayhew's original blueprints for the Argosy next to the publicly filed plans for Alistair's Zenith Tower. "Look," she said, her finger tracing the elegant lines of the old theater. "Thomas understood human scale, light, the way a person moves through a space. It's a masterpiece of intimate grandeur." Then she pointed to the plans for the Zenith. This is arrogance rendered in glass. It's sterile. It ignores the street, the neighborhood. It's a monument to ego, not to community. And from a structural standpoint," she added, her eyes gleaming, "he's cutting corners on the foundation to finance the height. It's a disaster waiting to happen." Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, provided a crash course in corporate warfare. He gave her detailed profiles of every board member of Finch Enterprises. "There are 12 of them," he explained, pacing the room. 5 are legacy members, loyal to the memory of Augustus. They'll back Alistair no matter what. 4 are institutional investors. They only care about the bottom line. The Zenith promises a huge return. But 3, he paused, 3 of them are on the fence. They have doubts about the project's cost and Alistair's leadership. They are your audience. Clara absorbed it all, her academic training kicking into high gear. This was just another form of research. She cross-referenced Eleanor's architectural critiques with Marcus's financial projections. She wasn't just learning talking points. She was building an argument, a case founded on her own expertise. Her master's thesis was on the structural and social importance of pre-war American theaters. She knew the Argosy inside and out, not just as her grandfather's work, but as a piece of history. The final step was her own appearance. Mr. Davies had arranged for a stylist not to disguise her, but to arm her. The simple waitress dress was replaced with a deep navy blue suit, exquisitely tailored. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger, but a familiar one. It was the woman she had hoped to become one day, a professional, an expert in her field. The quiet uncertainty was still in her eyes, but it was now banked by the fire of purpose. "They will see a waitress," Mr. Davies said gently, as they prepared to leave the next morning. "You must make them see an heir." In the back of the Lincoln, gliding through the canyons of the financial district towards the Finch Tower, Clara held a small worn leather journal. It was her grandfather's. On the last written page, dated a month before he died, was an entry she had read a dozen times. "They are tearing down the old buildings, the ones with stories. They replace them with glass boxes that reflect only themselves. The soul of the city is being hollowed out for profit. I should have fought him. All those years ago, I should have fought for my work. It is my life's great regret." Clara closed the journal and placed it in her briefcase. She wasn't just fighting for a building anymore. She was fighting to erase her grandfather's regret. The car pulled up to the imposing, almost brutalist facade of the Finch Tower. As Clara stepped onto the granite plaza, flanked by Mr. Davies, she took a deep breath of the cold Chicago air. She was terrified, but she walked forward anyway. The boardroom of Finch Enterprises was a temple of modern capitalism. Located on the top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view so commanding it felt like ownership. The air was cool and still. At the center of the room was a massive granite table, polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the sober faces of the board. Alistair Finch stood at its head, a portrait of controlled power. He was in the middle of a passionate, compelling presentation about the Zenith, using a state-of-the-art holographic model that shimmered in the center of the table. He was selling them not just a building, but a vision of the future, with Finch Enterprises at its very center. Seated in a chair just behind him, a glaring breach of protocol, was Serafina Belmont. She was wearing a blood-red dress, a choice that was either a statement of victory or a shocking lack of self-awareness. A smug, satisfied smile played on her lips. She was observing her future kingdom, watching her king command his court. The incident at the restaurant had been forgotten by everyone who mattered, a minor inconvenience on the path to glory. And so, Alistair was saying, his voice resonating with conviction, with your final approval to release the Phase 1 funding, we will break ground in 60 days. We will give Chicago a new icon. We will begin the next chapter of the Finch legacy. He was about to call for a vote when the heavy glass doors at the end of the room slid open. Alistair paused, his annoyance at the interruption visible. His executive assistant hovered in the doorway, his face pale. Mr. Finch, my apologies. You have visitors. They insist the meeting cannot continue without them. I'm not expecting anyone, Alistair said sharply. Have them schedule an appointment. I tried, sir, the assistant stammered. He said his appointment was made in 1948. Before Alistair could process the bizarre statement, Mr. Davies walked into the room, his old-world dignity a stark contrast to the room's aggressive modernity. Alistair, he said, his voice calm but firm, I believe you know who I am. Alistair's eyes narrowed. Davies, my grandfather's old adversary. What is the meaning of this? This is a private meeting. On the contrary, Mr. Davies replied, a cryptic glint in his eye. My business is with the very foundation of this board. He stepped aside and Clara Mayhew walked into the room. A profound, absolute silence descended. The holographic model of the Zenith continued to spin, a ghost of a future that might never be. The board members stared, confused. Who was this severe young woman in the navy suit? But two people in the room knew exactly who she was. Alistair Finch's confident facade disintegrated. It was like watching a statue crack. The waitress. The fired, humiliated waitress from Aurelia was standing in his boardroom. It was a violation of the laws of his universe. A prank? A shakedown? His mind scrambled for a logical explanation and found none. Serafina's reaction was more immediate. Her smug smile curdled into a sneer of pure contempt. You have got to be kidding me, she hissed, her voice loud in the dead silence. What is she doing here? Security! Someone get her out! Clara's gaze met Serafina's for a single, charged second. There was no fear in her eyes this time, only a calm, level assessment that was more unnerving than any anger. Her focus then shifted to Alistair, who was still speechless, his face a mask of disbelief. Mr. Davies walked to the great granite table and placed his ancient leather briefcase on its surface. The soft thud echoed in the room. There will be no need for security, he announced to the board. Allow me to introduce Clara Mayhew. He opened the briefcase and began distributing copies of a notarized, authenticated document to each board member. Ms. Mayhew, Mr. Davies continued, his voice ringing with the clarity of legal fact, is the sole heir to the Thomas Mayhew estate. As per the original 1948 partnership deed of this company, she is the beneficial owner of the intellectual property rights to all foundational projects and holds absolute veto power over any significant alteration or demolition of said properties. The sound of Serafina Belmont sharply inhaling was audible across the table. One of the older board members, A man named George Riley, who had known Augustus, stared at the document, his face ashen. Finch and Mayhew, he whispered, reading the letterhead. My God, Augustus always said he was dead. His legacy, it turns out, is very much alive, Mr. Davies said dryly. Alistair looked as if he had been punched. Veto power. The Mayhew estate. The ghost his grandfather had boasted of exorcising had returned, embodied by the waitress whose life he had so casually ruined. This is absurd, Serafina finally burst out, her voice shrill with rising panic. She serves fish. She's a nobody. This is a scam. Alistair, tell them. Clara finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of her grandfather's journals, of her 18 hours of intensive study, of a lifetime of being underestimated. I was a waitress, Miss Belmont, she said, her gaze locking onto Serafina. A position from which I learned a great deal about the true character of people when they think no one of importance is watching. She let that sink in before turning her attention to the head of the table. Today, however, I am the guardian of this company's soul, and I am here to prevent its sale. She walked toward the table, her steps measured and confident. Mr. Davies pulled out a chair for her, and she sat. She looked directly at Alistair. Mr. Finch, I believe you were about to call a vote on the demolition of the Argosy Theatre. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had inverted. Alistair, the king, was suddenly a supplicant. He struggled to regain his footing. This is irregular, but it doesn't change the facts. The zenith is vital to our growth. The Argosy is an old, inefficient building. The Argosy, Clara countered, her voice now filled with the authority of an expert, is a masterpiece of acoustics and design. It is also, according to the original structural reports, which I have here, she slid a folder across the table, built on a caisson foundation that is far more stable than the one you have proposed for your glass tower, which cuts corners to an alarming degree to support its unnecessary height. You are not replacing an old building with a better one. You are replacing a masterpiece with a monument to your own ego, and a dangerously flawed one at that. She turned to the board. Your CEO is asking you to approve a $900 million vanity project that is not only an act of cultural vandalism, but is structurally unsound and a massive insurance liability. He is asking you to tear down the very foundation of this company, both literally and figuratively. He is trying to erase the name Mayhew, just as his grandfather did. Serafina could not bear it. Her entire world, the power, the prestige, the future as Mrs. Alistair Finch, was being systematically dismantled by the girl she tried to crush. She's only doing this because of what happened at the restaurant, she shrieked, standing up. This is nothing but petty revenge for a ruined dress. Clara slowly turned her head and gave Serafina a look of cool pity. The incident with your dress was revealing, Ms. Belmont, but you are mistaken. To have revenge, there must first be a sense of injury, and you, she delivered the final devastating blow, are not significant enough to have injured me. You were merely an inconvenience. The words struck Serafina with the force of a physical slap. She was insignificant. A footnote. Clara turned back to the board, her voice ringing with finality. As the heir to the Mayhew estate, I am exercising my legal and moral authority. I am formally vetoing the demolition of the Argosy Theatre. The Zenith project, as currently designed, is dead. Furthermore, I am calling for an independent review of all current projects to ensure they align with the principles of quality and integrity on which this company was supposedly founded. It was a decree. George Riley, the old board member, looked at Clara with newfound respect. It's about time someone remembered Thomas Mayhew, he said, nodding slowly. Augustus rolled over him. This is justice. The battle was over. Alistair Finch sank into his chair, defeated. His grand vision, his escape from his grandfather's shadow, was gone, and it had been taken from him by a woman he wouldn't have trusted to carry his coat. Serafina stood frozen, her face a grotesque mask of rage and horror. She looked at Alistair, pleading with her eyes for him to do something, to fix it, to be the powerful man she had attached herself to. But he wouldn't look at her. He was staring at Clara, his expression a terrifying mixture of hatred, grudging respect, and dawning self-awareness. In that moment, Serafina understood. She had not only lost the argument, she had lost it all. She had tied her fortune to a king, and a quiet girl in a navy suit had just taken his crown. The boardroom cleared out in a stunned, silent exodus. The members filed past Clara with a mixture of awe and fear, their quiet nods acknowledging the new and undeniable center of power. Only Mr. Davies and George Riley, who stayed behind to shake Clara's hand with genuine warmth, remained by her side. Alistair was still in his chair, a man adrift in the wreckage of his own ambition. Serafina, realizing the curtain had fallen, made one last desperate play. She hurried to Alistair's side, her voice a cloying, panicked whisper. "Ali, darling, we'll fight her. We'll find a loophole. Your lawyers—" He slowly raised his head and looked at her. For the first time, he seemed to be truly seeing her. Not the beautiful fiancée or the strategic asset, but the person whose casual cruelty and screeching entitlement had been the catalyst for this entire disaster. She was not a partner. She was a symptom of the very arrogance that had just been so publicly humbled. "There is no we, Serafina," he said, his voice utterly flat. "You wanted a lesson in knowing your place. Here it is. You are no longer welcome in this building, or in my life." He gestured to his assistant, who was still hovering by the door. "David, have Ms. Belmont's things removed from the penthouse and sent to her mother's. Her access codes are to be revoked immediately." The color drained from Serafina's face. "Alistair, no, you can't. Go," he said, turning away from her, the dismissal more brutal than any shout. Defeated, discarded, and utterly alone, Serafina Belmont stumbled from the room, her reign of casual terror at an end. Now only Clara, Mr. Davies, and Alistair remained. Alistair rose and walked to the vast window, looking down at the city he had intended to conquer. "My grandfather told me Thomas Mayhew was a coward who ran," he said, his voice hollow. "He never said he was a visionary who was pushed." "He wasn't a coward," Clara said quietly, coming to stand a few feet behind him. "He was an artist. He chose to walk away rather than build things he didn't believe in." Alistair turned to face her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, searching curiosity. "Why didn't you just take a settlement? You could have named your price. Why go through all this?" "Because a settlement would have been his money," Clara said simply. "Saving the Argosy is my grandfather's legacy. Some things aren't for sale." She met his gaze, the power dynamic between them now irrevocably, permanently altered. "You fired me and threatened my future over a $30,000 dress. The irony is not lost on me." A deep, painful flush of shame rose on his face. "I am sorry," he said, the words costing him more than any check he could write. "For my actions, for hers, it was inexcusable." "Yes," Clara agreed, offering no easy forgiveness. "It was." A long silence hung between them, filled with the ghosts of their grandfathers. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Do you dismantle my company? Take your revenge piece by piece?" This was her moment of absolute victory. She could banish him, ruin him as he had intended to ruin her. But looking at him, she saw not just the arrogant man from the restaurant, but a man trapped in a legacy he hadn't created, trying to build something of his own, however flawed. Vengeance felt small. Building felt bigger. Her grandfather's last journal entry echoed in her mind. "I should have fought for my work." "No," she said. "You're a brilliant builder, Mr. Finch. You just have a terrible blueprint. I'm not here to tear down Finch Enterprises. I'm here to restore it." She extended her hand. "You will remain as CEO for now, but you will have a new partner. The name of this company was Finch and Mayhew once. Perhaps it's time we honored both founders. We are not going to build the Zenith. We are going to restore the Argosy Theater. We're going to make it the crown jewel of the city again. And that," she said, her voice firm with purpose, "will be our new legacy." Alistair stared at her hand, then at her face. It was not an offer of mercy, but of partnership. A second chance, earned at a staggering cost. It was a challenge to be a better man than his grandfather, and a better builder than he had been yesterday. Slowly, hesitantly, he took her hand. His was cold and trembling slightly. Hers was steady and warm. "I understand," he said. Months later, Clara stood under the grand proscenium arch of the Argosy Theater. The air was thick with the dust of restoration, the scent of fresh plaster and old wood. Blueprints, some her grandfather's, some her own, were spread across a makeshift table. Alistair stood beside her, pointing to a detail in the ceiling frescoes they had uncovered. An argument was brewing between them, a passionate professional debate about materials and timelines. It was their new normal. The restoration was a slow, arduous process, a negotiation between past and present. There were still days of tension, of mistrust, but they were building something together, something real. Back in her small Logan Square apartment, which she had refused to leave, her grandfather's journal lay open on her desk. She had not just erased his regret, she had transformed it into a future. She had been a waitress, invisible and dismissed. But she had learned that true power isn't about the height of the buildings you erect, but the strength of the foundations you are willing to defend. Clara Mayhew had finally found her place, not by serving the powerful, but by standing beside them as an equal and reminding them of the stories worth preserving.